Hey, cousin. Welcome to my podcast, The Liberal Black. I am your host, Mr. Cleo. The Liberal Black is unapologetically a podcast for black folks from all walks of life. But it is also a place for allies, too. Y'all are invited to the barbecue. It's a variety type show, a podcast, where we can be serious and deep thinking in one episode or laughing to release some tension in another. I hope this can be a place for us to be entertained and maybe we can be inspired along the way. Now, some episodes may feature a guest or expert, while others, I'm riding solo. Now, join me, fam, for what is sure to be a fantastic voyage. I am Mr. Cleo, and you are listening to The Liberal Black. Hey fam, how you doing? This is Cleo here, and I want to share with you today a little bit about my coming out journey. You just have me today, so hope you stay with me. My coming out journey probably sounds a lot like many other kids, maybe. Maybe it's somewhere in between. Some people have really hard stories and some people don't. I just want to share my story with you, my coming out journey with you today because it might help someone. And if it just helps one person, then that's good. You know, I'm not doing too bad for myself right now in my life. You know, they say it gets better, and it does get better. But honestly, when you're in the moment, you don't know that. And so, hopefully, listening to my story, if you're in the moment, you'll know it can get better for you. So, I grew up in Arkansas. That's where I was born. And a lot of my early gay memories were when I was on at my grandma's farmhouse, I guess we'll call it, off a little dirt road. And I was a very skinny little thing. Big lips, fair skin. I think I called myself a pretty boy at the time. Soft-spoken, tender-hearted, limp-wristed, probably had a lisp too. And boy, did I admire women. I just admired women for some reason in the most honorable of ways. So anywho, I think the first time I can recall thinking I was different was when we would play hide and go seek at Grandma's house. We would actually play hide and go seek with a group of neighborhood kids from down the road, my cousins and I. And I remember going to go hide, because actually I'm calling it hide and go seek, but it was really hide and go get it. Now, we ranged in age from about, I don't know, kindergarten to third grade, and we were playing this little game. And I remember hiding, going, oh, I hope the boy who's it finds me. Because when you, the way we played it, when you got found, the person had to hump you. You know, like a dog humping on a person's leg or something. And I, at my, however old I was at that time, I feel like I might have had to been 7 or something, was craving just the affection of a young boy. I was. I don't know how that sounds to you, but I know talking to a lot of my friends, a lot of us realized we were gay or different. We didn't have the word gay at the time, but realized that we liked boys, that we had crushes on boys as early as kindergarten. Some people I've even heard earlier. So we are playing how to go get it. I'm crushing on the boys and all that stuff. And for as long as I can remember, I had always wanted a boyfriend. I even remember being at grandma's house and on the floor, because Dynasty was on, for those of you who remember that show. Not the reboot that came out in the 2000s. I'm talking about Dynasties from, it had to be the 80s, I guess. And so I remember, being sent to bed. It's time for you to go to bed. You ain't got no business watching this show. But I had seen glimpses of Dynasty before and all the glamorous costumes, and I loved it. And so I remember going into my bedroom, the show is on, and I crawled stealthily on the floor to where I could see the TV from the bedroom. And all the adults were talking and watching TV, but I was transfixed by this particular episode where Blake takes Crystal in his arms. And it was quite aggressive, and I was aroused by that, my young self. Just thinking, to have a man take me in his arms, that would be so lovely. Hey, it's my truth. And so, these are the kind of, thoughts, I'm having as a young boy. Right now, at this point in my life, I don't have any, judgment on it. I do recall being, not being the toughest kid, and being, like I told you before, I was very tender-hearted. And I do remember one time being bullied and being at my grandma's house, and people, after a bully episode, that, I was put into a circle with the bully, and the bully might have even been a cousin. I can't remember who the person was at the time. But in my mind, the memory that I have is being surrounded, the two of us kids being surrounded with feels like 15, 12 people, adults, teenagers, screaming at us to fight, to wrestle, to be manly and struggle with each other. And that's my memory. And I remember I guess I was slightly traumatized by that moment of just, you're not tough enough, and so we're all going to try to make you tougher. I grew up in the church, and it was probably around about 11 or 12 where, of course, my longing for a boyfriend was starting to get really high. But it's also a point in time where I was really hyper involved in church, in the choir, Bible study, very involved. My mom is an evangelist. She's been a church pastor, and we've been involved in church as a family for as long as I can remember. I recall at some point that the Bible the preacher was saying that the Bible says, being gay is wrong. Being gay is going to send you to hell. I even remember, back in the day, they used to have these cartoon drawing pamphlets. I mean, they weren't drawn like, Tom and Jerry. They were drawn like real people, but they were animated drawings, little pamphlets, rectangular, and they would always have some kind of theme. And I remember one of the themes being about Sodom and Gomorrah, and how it made that these gay people were just basically trying to, get with old boy. I forget who his name was, the guy whose wife turned into a pillar of salt when she looked back. But they made out, like gays were just so these deviant people. who are just bound for hell. And, I was a fervent believer in what I was being taught. And that scared me so much. And I remember going to the altar calls that we would have in the church. I grew up non-denominational, holiness, and we would have prayer lines and altar calls and tent revivals. Lots of church, Sundays and Wednesdays and Saturdays. And every time there was an altar call, I was there. 10, 11 years old, 12 years old, on the altar crying and praying and begging God to take these feelings away from me. Begging and pleading that I don't want to go to hell. Please take this feeling away from me. I don't want to feel this way. I didn't ask for this. Help me, please. And so, of course, the feeling never left. And I remember one day, my mom had to go to a revival, and she took my little sister with her. And my brother and I, we went over to a elder of the church's house. Everybody called her Big Mama. So we went to Big Mama's house. And it was Wednesday night. It was a Bible study night. And I'll never forget it. Big Mama, she was going through the scriptures with us. And the lesson that night was God can do anything. Jesus can do anything for you. And I just started crying. Tears were running down my face. My heart, my chest was heavy. This is 12 years old. And she was like, "Baby, what's the matter?" I'm like, nothing's the matter. I can't talk about it. She said, "No, what's the matter? You can tell me." And I was like, "No, I can't talk about it. I can't talk about it, Big Mama. I can't talk about it." And so she stopped everything and took me into the kitchen with her. And even as a young boy, when I was skinny mini, I always loved to eat. I was always up for seconds and thirds. Matter of fact, my mom had to tell me that when we would go to church for the first of the month fellowship service, that I needed to wait till everybody got through the line before I went back up going for seconds. Because I get up there, and because everyone else, people like to dawdle around when it comes to the food line. I get up there, get in the line, get my food with my plate of bologna sandwich and chips or whatever the heck they were selling that offerings, giving away at that time. Come back, eat my food, and then get back in line. So I love to eat. And so Big Mama had a plate of hot biscuits. That's how I remember them. The biscuits could have been room temperature, but they were hot in my mind. And she got the biscuits out, and she didn't have any jelly. I remember that. And she made some sugar water. If you ain't country, you don't know what that is. That's when you don't have jelly, so you take your hot biscuit and you butter it, and then you get you some sugar, and you put some water in it, just enough so it's, kind of mushy like applesauce, I guess. And you can dip your biscuit in it and get you some sweetness. And so she plied me with the hot biscuits. And she was like, "What's wrong?" And I was like, "I can't talk about it. I can't tell you." And she said, "Here, write it down on this piece of paper." And so I wrote down on the piece of paper, "I think I'm gay." And she looked at it. She said, "Come on in here." And Big Mama's house was old. She had an old house. And where we were during the Bible study, we were around the stove. She had like this wooden stove that sat in the middle of the room. The stove pipe went up through the ceiling. And how you put wood in the stove was you took the top off of the pipe of the stove and you put the wood through the top of it, through a hole in the top of it. She took the top off of this hole. She balled the paper up in her hand and she said, "In the name of Jesus, this is gone." And she threw it into the fire. And she said, "That's it, honey. That's it. God has burned it away with the flame." And I said, "Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am." But boy, you know, in my mind, I was thinking, child, this ain't going nowhere. If I done spent years at the altar praying, snotting, crying, I'd have been in all of these prayer lines, getting my head anointed with oil and all this, laying on the floor of the church, praying and crying till I fell asleep. You throwing a piece of paper in the trash ain't gonna do nothing. So, my mom comes and picks us up that night. And back then, around that age, my brother, who is about a year and a half younger than me, we were awful tattletales back then. And so we're in the car, and my mom's like, how was it? Small talk. And my brother says, CJ was crying over Big Mama's house. And my mom was like, "What were you crying for?" And I'm like, "Nothing," of course. So we pull up to the house, to our trailer that we lived in, and she sends my brother and my little sister inside the house, and she said, and we stay in the car. And she says, "What were you crying about?" And I say, "Nothing. I wasn't crying about nothing." And she says, "We are not going into this house until you tell me what you were crying about." Oh. So I broke down. And I told her. I was crying because I think I'm gay. And she took a breath and she looked away from me. And she said, "It is nothing wrong with a young boy or girl to be curious about other young boys or girls at your age. That's natural. But you're too young to know anything like that about yourself right now. You don't need to say you are this or you are that." Now, in that moment, I said to myself, okay, she's not ready for the truth. So I locked that away. But in retrospect, I applaud my mother so much for her reaction to me in that moment. That could have went so many different ways. And you got to understand, that was probably the late 80s when this was happening. So it was a wholly different time. And I am grateful that my mom responded to me in that way. But as I said, I also knew that it wasn't my time. It wasn't, or I don't know if it would ever be my time, but I knew that thing, this feeling that I had for other boys who were like me, had to be tucked away. And I went into that closet for about the next 6 to 8 years, at least for my family. When I went to college, I eventually came out. But it wasn't until I was about 21 years old that I finally wrote my mom a letter. I think at this point, I was on my own. I wasn't getting any financial support from home. And I wrote my mom a letter to let her know that I was gay, unapologetically gay, and that I had been through all the wondering and the worries and the praying and the doubts and the this and the that, And that was it. This is who I was, and I was coming, and I was out, and I just needed her to know, because I needed her to know the real me. And she called me. I was living in Ohio at the time, and she called me and she said, "I got your letter, and I want you to know that you're my son and I will always love you. But we're going to have to disagree. We're going to have to agree to disagree about the right or wrong of this thing." And I said, okay. And probably for the next 5 or more years, I withdrew into myself. Because for me, while her reaction was heavenly compared to the reaction many other children have gotten from their parents, for me at the time that wasn't enough. I wanted her to wholly accept me. I wanted her to say it's okay, gay is fine, I want to meet your boyfriend if you got one, let's do this. Her polite refusal of that part of me really tarnished our relationship for many years to come. And I'm going to say probably mostly on my side. I was the one that withdrew. And it took me some time to come back. It took me some growing up to come back to realize that just in the same way that I wanted her to accept me for me, I needed to accept her for her. And that is what brought me back, emotionally speaking. Because I realized that even though maybe I wasn't getting the reaction that I wanted, how could I be justified in my actions when I wasn't doing the thing that I wanted someone else to do for me? You got what I'm saying? And so sometimes that's what we got to do in life, right? But ultimately, it all came around. You know, my little brother, who is the pinnacle of heterosexualness, he was A-okay with me. My sister, she had a moment or two, I think, of questioning, but she came around as well. And I'm happy to say that my family embraces me and loves me, and that our story isn't as bad as some other kids' story might be. But whatever your coming out story is, was, will be, it's your journey. And I hope that you have the allies in your life. And if you're an ally listening, I hope that you're an ally for someone who you knows is coming out or has come out, and are a safe place for them. I think the big thing to know is it can be okay. It can get better. But for those of you who are not in a safe place to come out, stay safe. Stay safe. If you think maybe you might get kicked out of the house if you come out, I don't know. Stay safe until you have another recourse. Until maybe your friend tells you, yeah, if you ever need a place to stay, if you ever get kicked out, you can come here. Or you have called a hotline or a community center to know what is your recourse if you can't continue to be yourself in the place that you call home. So I want to end this with definitely saying that it can get better, but I definitely encourage you to be safe. And I also want to just remind you of some programs out there that you can reach out to. Of course, there's the Trevor Project that you can call at 1-866-488-7386. There's the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. That's at 800-273-8255. They also have online chat. And there's also the Gay, Lesbian, Bisexual, Transgender National Hotline at 888-843-4564. And there's others. That's the great thing about the day that we live in, is that there's a lot of resources for our young, gay, transgendered, bisexual, curious, queer, wherever you find yourself in your sexuality or coming out. There are resources for you. You don't have to go it alone. And I hope you don't go it alone. And I hope that this podcast today lets you know that you're not alone. Thank you for listening, and be encouraged. Be encouraged. Hey fam, I am so thankful you've chosen to listen to the Liberal Black Podcast. If this is your first time, welcome to the family. And if you're a repeat offender, good to see you back, cousin. Head on over to www.theliberalblack.com for more information. You can download this podcast on Anchor, Spotify, YouTube, and Google Podcasts. Also, check us out on Twitter and Instagram. Remember, I am Mr. Cleo, and this is the Liberal Black Podcast. Be encouraged, y'all.